here to speak about the death of print today. I made the slight mistake of talking about the death of print about a year ago, and I was just saying at the table there that somebody immediately tweeted 140 characters that I had predicted the imminent death of print, and then that ended up in a blog on The Guardian within half an hour. What they hadn't tweeted, because in 140 characters you can only do so much, was to say that yes, print is going to die, but we're all going to die. In the words of John Maynard Keynes, in the long term we're all dead. So I think that from the perspective of newspapers, sometimes I could be perceived, I think, a little bit within the Irish Times as being the Chicken Little who runs around saying, the sky's falling, we're all going to die. But the fact is that newspapers have always been subject to enormous technological change and transitions, and the newspapers that have survived over the years have been in a position, both intellectually and in terms of the way their business is constructed, to take advantage of new opportunities rather than just see change as a threat. Having said that, I think one cannot ignore the fact that for newspapers, as for every other form of intellectual content creator and distributor in the world at the moment, we face an unprecedented challenge. The rules of our game have changed in a way that hasn't been seen for many, many generations. People talk about a Gutenberg moment, saying that the way in which ideas are created and disseminated are changing in the most fundamental way since the invention of the printing press 600 or 700 years ago. That may or may not be true, but I certainly do know for a fact that we're facing a change which is the most fundamental change since the middle of the 19th century, when essentially most of the mechanisms for creation and delivery of intellectual content that we are familiar with today were devised. I know there was no television in the middle of the 19th century, but the concept of mass production and distribution, which led to the development of the newspaper industry, the popular books industry, ultimately the music industry, television, radio, broadcasting, and so on and so forth. The rules of that game, which were largely established between the middle of the 19th century and the first couple of decades of the 20th century, have been fundamentally changed in the last 20 years or so. That creates a challenge, not just for newspapers, it creates a challenge for people working in marketing and advertising. We all know about the impact on the music industry. We know about the impact on the books industry. Waterstones is an empty shop down there, just 100 yards down the road. 100 yards in that direction is HMV. The reasons those shops are open are for exactly the same reasons that we in newspapers face fundamental challenges. And I don't work in marketing, I don't work in sales, I'm a journalist, and I would have to admit that sometimes journalists can be very blinkered about what they do, and they don't intellectually engage with what's happening around them. And when I talk about intellectually engage, I mean both the theory of what we do and why we do it, and also the business models underpinning our newspapers and our broadcasters and so on and so forth that allow us to do those things in the first place. And we really, we can't make any excuses about that anymore. We have to understand in a much more fundamental way what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're going to pay for it in the next few years. And the reality is, I don't believe all print is going to die, but I think most newspapers will not be with us in 20 years' time. The ones that are still with us will be clever, will be flexible, will take advantage of the new technological opportunities to grow new kinds of audiences and new kinds of relationships with those audiences. People talk a lot about the new challenges. These are not really new challenges anymore. There are people who can legally marry at the moment who weren't born at the time when the Irish Times went online for the first time. So we're now talking about a generation or more of digital consumption and digital distribution and so on and so forth. But most of the changes which we're dealing with right now have been flagged for many, many years. The detail of them may not have been anticipated in exactly the way in which they've turned out. I got a bus here this morning. I didn't see one person with a paper product in their hands. I saw Kindles, I saw Android smartphones, I saw iPhones, but I didn't see any print products. I think that the way in which mobile has exploded in the last 3 or 4 years has taken some people by surprise. But the underlying principle of digital consumption replacing print consumption and other forms of tangible consumption has been predicted for many years. We've done endless amounts of market research, as many of you know, about the demographic changes, about digital natives as opposed to digital immigrants, about people who've grown up playing games and consuming content through digital channels and who've never been habituated to the concept of consuming a tangible product. That might all sound very bleak, but actually I should say, because I don't believe that newspapers are entirely going to die, that one of the interesting things which the digital revolution throws up is that a reassessment of what tangible products are. I think you look at the music industry and look at how it's been turned upside down. 10 years ago, U2 would have gone on a world tour in order to promote their album. These days, U2 or their equivalent release an album in order to promote their world tour. The business model is turned upside down, but there's still a business there. And in a digital world where increasingly our relationships are through one of these or through our phone or whatever, we actually start to think in a different way and to value what a tangible product is about. We were talking just before I came up about the Saturday Irish Times and how people luxuriate and the concept of sitting down with their latte and several sections of a print product, and they enjoy it in a way that they don't necessarily do or don't feel that they have the opportunity to do between Monday and Friday. So the challenge for us is to provide them with a digital channel which works with their modern lives from Monday to Friday, but also supports their desire to consume a print product in a different kind of a way on a Saturday. Newspapers and media organizations in general, when sort of grasping at straws in some of the huge challenges that we have at the moment, have tended to focus a lot in the last few years on reach, and we have these fantastic numbers about millions of people or millions of browsers who come to our sites every month or every week or so on and so forth, and you'll see these trumpeted. In my view, that's been to some extent a mistaken strategy. Engagement is a much more useful model, because engagement is something that you can build a business around. Reach is only something that you can build a business around if you're in the business, if you're looking for global scale. So it may well be that the Daily Mail, which is, I think, widely acknowledged as being the most successful English language newspaper-based website in the world, may actually manage to create a successful business model out of its free-to-air website, but most newspapers won't. So the question is, what for us in the Irish Times is, what is our business model, what is our audience, and how do we build a sustainable business out of that? For me, actually, when you strip it all down, it's not that different from our older, more traditional business model, where we position ourselves as the premium quality news and journalism brand in the Irish market. We sell at a premium to our users, and we talk to our advertisers as well. We say, if you need to get in touch with urban, educated, affluent audience, well then you need to be in the Irish Times. And that is as true in digital as it ever has been in print. What we need to add to it is the sophistication which digital tools allow us now in terms of our analytics and in terms of our data, so that we can deliver those audiences to those advertisers in a way that works for them in the digital world, and to compete with the new media people who are stealing our lunch right now, frankly, the Facebooks of this world, who have the data about our users that up until now we haven't had. The other part of this equation, and one that gets perhaps focused on a lot more in the outside world, is the question of paying for content. And the Irish Times, and indeed other newspapers in the Irish market, have flagged that, like many newspapers in the United States, and like the Telegraph in the UK announced 2 weeks or so ago, we will be looking to move towards a more paid content model in the next few months, certainly over the course of this year. It should come as no surprise to people that that's happening. You know, we've hummed and hawed and toed and froed over the years in the Irish Times, as have many other newspapers, about whether this is a good policy or not, and indeed the Irish Times was behind a paywall, a word which I hate, by the way, a paywall between the years of 2002 and 2007, and then came out behind it, from behind it, and has been free since 2008. And we've grown numbers and we've grown audience hugely because of that. But I think the reality is, and it's been intensified by the economic crisis of the last few years, is it's become clear to news and journalism content creators that basing our business model on advertising alone is not going to be sufficient to provide us with a revenue base to continue to do what we want to do. But it's also become clear that what one might call the News International model, followed by the Times and the Sunday Times in the UK, has a severe downside as well, because it means that you're left with a very, very small digital audience. So most of us, and I include the Telegraph in this, and I think 30% of big city US newspapers have gone down this road already now as well, are moving towards some kind of a metered, porous paywall kind of a solution. And what that means is that you can retain a considerable amount of your reach and your traffic with the more casual user who might come through an occasional Google search, perhaps 10 or 20 or even 30 times a month. But for the committed, regular reader of your newspaper or your website, somebody who's coming to you every day, is a primary source of news, you'll be asking them to make a financial contribution and to pay for that content. And we really should not be remotely embarrassed or ashamed about that. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. I've had arguments over the years with many of my colleagues in journalism who believe actually that there is something morally wrong about giving our content away via the internet. I've always disagreed with that. I don't think morality comes into this at all. What comes into this is what works for us and what allows us to continue over the next 10 years while we're in what promises to be a continuing period of turbulence and transition, and while we search for new models to make that work. I think I was asked to come along here today, I think I'm right in saying, because we did launch a redesigned version of our website, irishtimes.com, 4 weeks ago, and I'm happy to talk about that a little bit, because in a way, the decisions that we have made in relation to that are very much informed by the business challenges which we face and how we see ourselves positioned in the years to come in relation both to appealing to advertisers and building new revenue streams through that channel, and also in terms of appealing to our users. I think the most important thing to say for this audience, first of all, is that the redesigned website is the output of a much larger technology project behind the scenes, whereby for the first time we're integrating the content management system which produces our newspaper and our print product with the content management system that produces our web products and our digital products. Now, people's eyes tend to glaze over a little bit sometimes when it comes to talking in detail about these kinds of technologies, but they are fundamental to what we're doing here. It is my personal opinion that one of the ways in which media organizations have been slow to deal with new challenges and new threats is in understanding technology. We need to be much more technology savvy and technology adept than we have been previously. And one of the ways in which perhaps that absence of knowledge has manifested itself over the past 15 years or so since the Irish Times went online for the first time is that essentially what we've been doing is producing a newspaper and then putting that newspaper content online once a day. And then over the course of that decade and a half, we've added various other services, breaking news and blogs and live blogs and bits of video and galleries. And we've dressed things up and we've designed them a little bit better as we went on. But that fundamental thing that we did way back in the era of phones the size of a brick, we were still doing up until a few months ago. Every night, we took all that content from the newspaper and placed it on the website. Now, there were two problems with that, two very fundamental problems with that as a business concept. First of all, the content itself wasn't properly fit for purpose in that this was flat text versions of articles going up in the internet and wasn't data rich, and it didn't have the underlying metadata which would allow both our users to use it in a more useful way, allow them to find it in a more useful way on the internet, and into the future allow us to exploit the long-tail value of things like book reviews, for example. So if we, into the future, wanted to enter into an agreement with a retailer to sell books which we gave reviews to, it was impossible for us in our previous content management system to identify a piece of content, say, this is a book review, this is the title of the book, this is the ISBN of the book, let's link up with a retailer and have a point in that book review where you can click and make a decision to purchase. That's just one small example of the kind of roads which we're looking to open up for ourselves with metadata-rich technology underlying the presentation of our articles and our other content over the next few months, years, etc., etc. One of our developers gave me what I thought was a nice metaphor for this. He talked about the Tuscan railways in the middle of the 19th century. And given that you all work in marketing, I'm sure you've all been to Tuscany many times. You'll be aware that it's very hilly. And when they were building the railroads in the 1850s, they built the rail tracks up and down over all the hills, even though there were, in some cases, there were no trains available with the power to haul carriages up those steep hills at the time. But they built those railroads over those hills on the basis that somebody would invent the trains. And in a way, that's what we're doing with underpinning our content with metadata at the moment. We know there are opportunities in app building, in commercial partnerships, in getting into the retail space, and in various other ways which we can't possibly predict at the moment. Because the reality is, if we had been developing a new website and a new integrated content management system, let's say 5 or 6 years ago, we wouldn't have known what an iPad was. We'd barely have known what an iPhone was. We might have heard of Facebook, but we probably wouldn't have heard of Twitter. So God knows what the equivalents of those things are going to be in 5 or 6 years' time. What we need to understand is that data underpins everything, and we need to have control over our data and have the most sophisticated tools in order to manage that data at the moment. So data is a key part of what we're doing underpinning our website. The other one, to go back to that bus I was sitting on half an hour ago, is the incredibly fast migration to mobile. We relaunched our news app back in November. Its growth has been extraordinary. Nearly 30% of our traffic now comes through that app alone. If you add to that the fact that to our website proper, another 25% of our website traffic comes through mobile devices of one sort or another, be it phones or tablets or the kind of intermediate devices which you see around the place. All of a sudden you say 45% of our traffic is coming through mobile, and that's without us actually doing very much to target it. I predict that over 50% of our traffic will be mobile before the end of this year, and I think we're looking in future at a mobile world. Now, mobile is a very broad, generic kind of a phrase. There's a big difference between a tablet and an iPhone, for example, in terms of the way people use it and where they use it and how they use it. But the reality is, it's a touchscreen device world, it's an always-on world, it's a point and click and I always have it kind of a world. And it's a very different world from the traditional one, which our online operations were built for, which is to service people sitting at a desk with a grey box in front of them. To me, this is a great relief because the reality is the grey box on the desk was not a very good business model for us. If we looked at our analytics, we had a very shallow level of engagement. Many of you will have seen the comparisons between the in-depth relationship which people have with printed products, where they spend 25 or 30 minutes in a day reading a newspaper, and the incredibly shallow engagement that they traditionally had with news websites, where they're in and they're out, they bounce in and they're out, they're there for a minute and a half, and they're away again. And we could see those sort of patterns replicated in our traffic over the course of a day, where we had traffic spikes at 9 o'clock in the morning and at 1 o'clock. And that said to me that Hugh Linehan comes in with his big gulp latte, plonks it down on the desk, switches his computer on, and while his boss isn't looking, has a quick scan of the news before he actually gets down to work, and then fecks off and does something else. And maybe when he sits down with his plastic ham sandwich for his dinner al desco at 1 o'clock, does exactly the same thing for another 2 or 3 minutes. Not a very good business model for us, and really not particularly interesting for advertisers, I think, also, and quite rightly so. If you look at the behavior on mobile, both in terms of phones and in terms of tablets, what you see is you see people coming into the site a lot earlier. You see them coming in at commuting times, so they're there at 7:30, 8 o'clock, 8:30. You see serious spikes. The same at going home time. But also interestingly, you see a lot more people consuming your content well into the evening, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. They're sitting on the couch and they sit back and they may have something which people are unlikely to have at their desk, which is a long read. So they'll read opinion columns and features and so on and so forth, all of which not just are good for us from the point of view of recognizing what our quality journalism is about and seeing it consumed, but also in terms of linking with advertisers, and also in terms of, I would think, of people valuing our product in a real way, rather than having a very thin veneer of a relationship with them. So those technologies underpinned what we were doing, but obviously we redesigned our website at the same time. When one talks about a redesigned website, there are 4 areas that I would mention. There's the aesthetics, which is how the thing looks. There's the functionality, which is how the thing works. There's navigation, which is how the hell do you get around the thing. And there's content, probably most importantly of all, which is what's on the thing. And in all those cases, we've made some really fundamental changes with the website. One thing is we are far more pictorially driven. We've devised a framework where there's virtually a picture with every story, and that presents at the front end. We think that's particularly important for the mobile audience as we continue to grow it. We look forward to adding more moving images to those images over the next few months, which is a key part of how we're going to move forward over the next while. In terms of the functionality, we want this to work well on mobile. So this is now a responsive design. I think it's the first one in the first full news website in the Irish market. RTE have kindly pointed out that the RTE player is also responsive design. But certainly we're the first newspaper website. And what that means is that if you haven't seen it, have a look through your phone or your iPad and you will see that the site itself and the articles will configure differently and deliver differently according to the size of your screen. And we think that's very important for the mobile reasons which I've already talked about. Some people get a bit scared about mobile because one of the things about mobile is the market is well behind the audience. The audience is moving there very fast. The market has yet to devise the sophistication of advertising attached to that content that we're familiar with on full websites. But the market is going to have to follow the audience. And as far as I'm concerned, as a news website, we need to be there with that audience and not be handing it over to new arrivals or indeed Facebook. And that's very important to us. Navigation changes in a mobile world, and we've made some pretty fundamental changes in terms of that as well. But I'd like to focus on content. And to come back to that point about we don't dump the entire newspaper content on the website anymore. That doesn't mean that we're holding back stuff for the newspaper to say, you can't have this unless you buy the newspaper. That's not necessarily what we're doing at all. What we're doing is supplying the content to our digital audience at the time that's appropriate for them and when they need it. What does that mean in practice? It means that the page one lead of the Irish Times print newspaper today is, I think I'm right in saying, because I never look at the thing anymore, is the Savita story. Is the Savita story from yesterday. Very dramatic testimony at the inquest in Galway. But if you look at the page one, if you look at the homepage lead on irishtimes.com, the Savita story is not the lead. And there is a reason for that, and that is that we were covering that in an almost live way throughout the day yesterday. All the key testimony was reported, and we got it up on the website as quick as we could. We had various pieces of analysis which were up by the early evening, and indeed we had further analysis through 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock last night. So in other words, we have a differentiated product which is serving its audience in a different way. I have no doubt that there'll be more dramatic testimony out of that story today, and the Savita story will be back as our lead. But our audiences have different desires and different needs, and we need to be able to react to those and to deal with those in different ways. The reality is that there are some things that go in newspapers that really belong in newspapers, and there are some things that go on websites that really belong on websites. Nobody's suggesting we replicate our live blogs back into our print product, and I don't necessarily think that vice versa. There are every single dotted I and crossed T on the newspaper needs to go to the website in turn. The reality is we have a multiplicity of audiences and not one homogeneous audience. Our website is increasingly geared towards our digital native audience so that we can compete with competitors like the Journal. Our newspaper and our e-paper and our Kindle and probably other digital products are targeted increasingly at what you might call digital migrants, who are the people who are moving to some extent away from print and onto the website. If you want a replica of the newspaper in the digital space, we have a number of different products that suit you depending on what you want and what your device is. And we look forward to ramping up and improving those products over the next while, particularly in terms of the e-paper, which I think techies tend to be quite snooty about because it's a PDF reader, man. But the fact is, it's actually on touchscreen devices, on the iPad, it's a very good substitute for the newspaper, and there's new technology coming down the wires, which I think will make it even better. I suppose ultimately we've made these changes now, but I think what they reflect is the fact that we are now embarking on a journey that some might say we should have started making a bit earlier. By we, I mean journalists in general and not just the Irish Times. which is about really redefining our journalism and making it fit for purpose in the digital world. And that means exploring the new possibilities which technology offers in areas like data journalism, for example, using new forms such as live blogs. We're experimenting this week with actually having a daily rolling news live blog that will pull in information from everywhere and push it out to the audience in real time. Live streams, video live streams and audio live streams. And also, very importantly, not being afraid to trust our readers to contribute to the unfolding narrative of the day's events. They're out there, they're seeing things. If they see stuff, we want to know about it. If they have an opinion, we want to hear about it. We're moving from a model where we're like this, like a priest at a pulpit telling you what it's all about, to a conversational model where we're sitting around a table. That does not mean that we don't bring special expertise and special talents to that conversation, but we need to be much more open to the conversational model. But in order to do all these, we have to face the very important challenge of making our own editorial operations fit for purpose and our business fit for purpose. And I would not minimize how difficult that is at a time of shrinking revenue. With circulation in decline, our revenues we anticipate will continue to decline from that point. Advertising, I would say, in print is holding up remarkably well, and fair play to our advertising department on that. But I think that actually reflects an uncertainty on the part of the business world in general about how well digital products so far have delivered, and a knowledge that print still delivers in advertising in a way that many of the digital channels don't, which in a way is somewhat of a relief of us. It gives us a bit of a buffer, but we still need to focus on growing our digital business, because the reality is, no matter how good a prognostication you make about the survival of print and the future of print, the growth opportunities lie in digital, the future lies in digital. We need to invest in digital, we need to invest in people and invest in skills, and then output that for our audiences, and that's what we plan to do. Thank you.